In this video, I'd like to give you an overview of macros and then open our first workbook and take a look at running a macro. So the first thing you need to know about macros, I think, is what they are. And a macro is just an automated set of commands and keystrokes for simplifying a routine task. Say, for example, you work for a certain person in the company and you are always typing that person's signature line on letters. You can create a macro to do that for you to take care of that task. Or you can do a print setup macro, or there's a lot of different instances where you can use macros. Now, one thing you need to know about macros is that they are recorded and they can also be written if you know how to use Visual Basic for Applications, which is a programming language. And because they are recorded in VBA, that means that they could harbor harmful programs or harmful materials. So you should only ever run a macro from a trusted source. And for that reason, macros are stored in, in order for the macro to work, you have to save it in a macro-enabled workbook. And it will be saved with a new file extension, XLSM. And the default when you open a macro-enabled workbook is for it to open up and ask you if you want to enable the content. So it gives you a chance to think about this before you go ahead and open this up and let a macro have access to your computer. So as you can see, macros must be enabled to be used. And so we're going to take a look at the Trust Center, and this is the Trust Center dialog box. And this is what happens when you first open a macro-enabled workbook. You'll get this yellow bar right above the formula bar that tells you that the macros have been disabled, and if you want to use them, you have to click on Enable Content. So let's take a look at a workbook here. This is a macro-enabled workbook, as you can see by the file extension, and you can see that I'm getting the security warning right now. And I know that this particular workbook is okay. It's from a trusted resource, so I'm going to go ahead and click Enable Content. For your own computer, if you go to the File tab and to the Excel options, and then to the Trust Center, and then Trust Center Settings, and then macro settings. You can choose how you want the macros handled. You can have them disabled without notification. The default is to disable all macros with notification. And there are some other options. I'm just going to go ahead and click OK to accept the default setting, and to close the options dialog box. And there is a macro stored in this workbook to insert the company name up here at the top of the worksheet. And that's something that you would routinely do if you were creating worksheets for a certain company or for a certain purpose. So I'm going to go to the View tab and click on the View tab, and at the end of the ribbon on the View tab is the macros command, And I'm going to go ahead and click on the macros button, and you can see the macros name here, and then you have some choices for things that you can do with the macro. I want to run it, so I'm going to click Run, and there it is. Now obviously I would need to adjust these rows a little bit, but other than that, the macro enters that information for me with a little bit of formatting, such as making the font larger. I could have made the font bold. I could have applied a different color. Whatever types of steps that I would typically take with that particular set of information. In the next video, we'll look at editing a macro.